Hello, Tandem fandom, and welcome to another YouTube episode. Today, you've got some familiar faces, but also some not so familiar faces. So, hi, I'm Lex, and you will have seen Jenny before on some of our other genre correspondent videos, but we're going to do a little whip round now to make sure that you are introduced to the full team. So, I'll start just in case anybody hasn't met me before. Hi, my name is Lex. I have read 28 Jacqueline Wilson books. The first Jacqueline Wilson book that I ever read was Vicky Angel, and the most recent Jacqueline Wilson book that I read was Midnight, which came out in 2006. So, Elle, do you want to give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Elle. I have read, I estimate, 19 Jacqueline Wilson novels. The first one I read was also Vicky Angel. And the
It's
last
an
one
era. It is an
I
era.
it was definitely a great introduction. But I think the last one I read was a Rogue 2010 novel, which was Secrets.
Okay, okay. Jade?
Hi, I'm Jade, and I think I've read about 15, possibly more, but that's a very
Mhm.
rough estimate. My first one that I read was Double Act. I won an essay competition at school and I got book vouchers, and that was what I bought. And I read it and loved it and fell in love. And my most recent one that I read as a reread was The Illustrated Mum.
That's a great one.
Yeah, love it.
Alice?
Hi, I'm Alice. I don't remember exactly how many. I don't have as good a memory, but I think around 20 something. Um, and I remember reading like the Cliffhanger book, which is for like quite young readers. So I think that maybe was like one of the first. And then I was looking through like a list and I remember Lily Alone, which was from 2011. So I think that was like around the time I stopped reading. And then I also reread the Girls in Love book last night. So that's the most recent one.
Last night, I feel like you're university cramming for a test this morning.
Yeah, yeah, I was.
And Jenny?
Hi, I'm Jenny. I have no idea. I've been rereading Jacqueline Wilson over the last couple of months. So looking around my library, I've got about 25 books around me that are Jacqueline Wilson's. So I'm gonna estimate around about 25, but I have no clue. The most recent was Love Lessons.
Which we will talk about. I feel like we can't not address it. We will talk about it. Awesome. So, for those of you who are watching, I'm sure it has become blatantly obvious. Today, we are discussing Jacqueline Wilson and how she has changed our reading experiences as kind of 30 plus women now looking back on our reading experiences. Sorry, I'm just grouping you all as 30 plus women, and I realize that you're not, but
Yeah,
So
you're
30
all
plus
enough.
women plus Alice.
So I want to talk about that first experience where it might not have been the first Jacqueline Wilson book that you read, but whenever it was when you settled into that part of your brain where you were like, yes, I am going to be a Jacqueline Wilson fan. This is who I am. For me, I remember going into a WH Smith's in a train station with my grandmother. And it was like my first opportunity to buy like proper books with chapters in it. And she was really pushing me to pick two books from different authors so that I could get some like, I don't know, exposure to different authors or whatever. And I was like, no, I don't think that's the way forward for me. I think I need to choose two Jacqueline Wilson books. Like I was sold by the covers, of course I was, and we will definitely talk about Nick Sharratt. Um, but I read Vicky Angel and also Dustbin Baby. And I feel like those are two quite like harrowing books to go in for. But Elle, you were saying that Vicky Angel was also your first book. Was that when you realized that you were sold on the Wilson trajectory?
Yeah, it's really funny for me actually because it also sold me on the whole trajectory of becoming a reader because I don't remember in my early childhood my household was not a book household. I had three brothers and they even to this day in their late 20s, early 30s probably have never read a full book from start to finish. And that was kind of the vibe in my house. And then again, I remember I was just old enough to like start getting pocket money and I was allowed to get the train into town on my own. And again, walked into a WH Smith's because that was where it was at in, I don't know, like 2004. And I saw Vicky Angel and a couple of other like obviously Jacqueline Wilson books, but I just remember it was kind of the cover, I think. Again, like shout
Mhm.
out to Shara. but I saw the cover. It was obviously it's quite short, and so that was it. That was the first book I probably bought for myself, and then it kind of spiraled from there. Like I remember next I did actually get my dad to buy me the box set of like the girls books. So the Girls In series. But yeah, Vicky Angel was definitely the moment where
Oh my God, does Jenny have the box set that you got?
Is that the original?
no, so it was that style covers, but I can vividly remember it came in an actual box and it was for individual titles. Like I actually have like I'm really sad about this, but I actually gave my entire Jacqueline Wilson collection to a cousin after I stopped reading her. This was obviously probably yeah, so I probably stopped reading Jacqueline Wilson about 2006, but I, apart from that one book in 2010, so I donated them all, and she wasn't even a reader. If I could go back in time, I would rescue my whole collection. But yeah, so that for me, reading that first book, it not only got me on Jacqueline Wilson, it got me on reading, and it was from that I just started to read everything in sight.
Yeah, God, 100%. I feel like quite a lot of our stories are probably going to be quite similar to each other. But Alice, you probably didn't start with Vicky Angel, did you? You started a little bit later.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember Vicky Angel. Obviously, it was already published like before I was born and before.
Wait, whoa, hang on a second. We're not dinosaurs, Alice.
Vicky Angel came out in 1991. Is that
Okay,
right?
we're not dinosaurs,
Tracy
Alice.
Beaker was the first, and that came out in 92.
Oh, okay.
Vicky Angel was about 2001. So possibly,
Okay.
yeah.
We need to verify this. I'm looking
I'm
right
looking
now.
it up right now.
Yeah.
It was 1991.
Vicky Angel.
Okay, I take it.
Oh, hang on. Wikipedia says it was first published in 2000.
Yeah, my thing here says first published 2000. This is 2001.
I was born.
Okay.
You have sent us a good list.
Minor shade aside, Alice.
No, that wasn't shade. But no, I don't remember what my first one was, like I said. But I did have like a similar experience to Elle, where like Jacqueline Wilson is one of the first like authors, and probably all of you, that like I remember reading and loving, and like I didn't grow up with like book lovers. And then I was just there like collecting all of these Jacqueline Wilson books like in the corner reading them. So I think like at the time whatever the first book was, I then obviously like went back and like read as many as I could physically get my hands on in the library. But yeah, I just can't remember which one. Like I don't remember the moment where I was like, buying my first one.
Well, I feel like Alice actually has a moment that I don't know if any of us have. Alice has actually met Jacqueline Wilson.
Have.
Screaming, crying, throwing up.
Yeah,
I was. And shout out to my family who I've just like said didn't read. They queued up with me for like 3+ hours outside this Waterstones. It was like a snaking queue. Obviously, it was in the north as well, so like she didn't come up there much. We were there like queuing up. And then just as I got to the front of the queue, my like mum's phone was on like 1% or something. So I went to take a picture, she snapped the photo, and then the phone ran out, and we had to like travel all the way home to see if I had the photo. And I do still have that photo.
I'm so happy you had a camera phone for that moment, because if that happened when I was younger, it would have been a disposable.
Yeah, does that not completely just illustrate the previous point that Alice is reading in a different era to us? I feel like I should have had a like Victorian man with a sheet over his head and like a puff of smoke coming out of the camera.
I will say that the book she signed was Kiss, so that's kind of when I met her, whenever that was.
That to me, Kiss is like way.
Yeah, that's like modern.
Yeah.
I read Kiss last month. I think it was about 2003, because it was one where I was like, I was about this age of the characters when this was written.
It was 2006, so that's definitely like.
I love that we're just consistently fact checking each other on this. Like, no, don't mess with my history. So Jade, you read a lot of like kids' books and middle grade books for work. Are you reading Jacqueline Wilson again now, or?
I've tried. So you inspired me actually, because when the whole like announcement came out about this, what we're going to talk about, obviously, at some point today. But when that came out and you were like, right, I'm on a mission, I'm finding all of the Jacqueline Wilson books in charity shops. And I was like, I love this mission. I'm doing it too. But sadly, down where I am, I've only been able to find 3. And like Elle, I had a big collection when I was younger and I gave them all away, which I'm kicking myself about. But I've recently reread The Illustrated Mum and The Cat Mummy, which I didn't read when I was younger, but I've read now as an adult. And I'm so thankful I didn't read that when I was younger. I think that would have actually like torn me apart, because it got me as an like 30s, you know, mid 30s adult, and I was just like, I can't like actually hold back the tears. But yeah, it's such a different ride reading them now from back then. But when I first got Double Act, like I said, I'd won an essay competition at school. I was the only person.
Which is so on brand. Let's just comment on that for a second and say, oh, how did you read your first Jacqueline Wilson? I won an essay competition.
Yes. I was the only student to ask for book vouchers.
Oh, Jade.
And like my parents, I always remember my parents reading. My mum back in the day was a very big Danielle Steele reader back in the day. And I know the team have spoken about Danielle Steele before.
Jade, I feel like we have the same mum. My mum still has all of her Danielle Steeles on all of her bookshelves at home.
So she's not a Danielle Steele reader anymore. She's more of a you. She's like thriller after thriller after thriller.
Okay.
Yeah, and I always have like really nice memories of me playing and my parents. Like my dad's always been a non-fiction reader. He'd be reading in his spare time and mum would read. So I was always around books, but then secondary school happened. And I think those first couple of years, I was like, I'm not reading. Like, you know, that was not on my to-do list. And then year 9, won this thing. And I was like, I'm going to get a book voucher. Went and bought Double Act and instantly thrown into, I need to read everything and anything. And that was where it started. Like, it just had me. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And Jenny, how about you? Was there a moment where you realized where you were a fully paid up member of Jacqueline Wilson cult?
I don't know. Because like similar to what Elle has been saying, my parents, my family are not readers. However, my mum was always very encouraging of reading like picture books and reading bedtime stories and reading, you know, learning to read as a child. So we always had books, but nobody else in the family read. And I think my first Jacqueline Wilson was probably either my very old, very battered copy of The Lottie Project, which is so sun damaged you can't see what the title is anymore, or Double Act as well. Like I just remember reading them, but we'd go every week to the library in the summer holidays, and that's probably where I kind of found Jacqueline Wilson, probably between those kind of classic middle gradey authors, so like Jacqueline Wilson, Roald Dahl, those sort of very kind of classic authors. And I think Jacqueline Wilson I discovered in the library, and then just started reading everything. And again, being slightly on the more mid end of the 30s, I was alive when they were all published. I think as well, like when the story of Tracy Beaker became a BBC show, I remember that happening and being still like I'd read the book and then got kind of back into wanting to read that book again and read more around it as well. And yeah, I don't really remember a sort of key moment or like the first book or anything. I did also, so again, I had got a collection of maybe about 10 Jacqueline Wilson books. I seem to have got about 3 left over from that original collection. And I don't know what happened to them all. I'm really upset that I've lost my Double Act book, because I remember having it when I trained to be a teacher, and it was planned to go into like my class. That never happened. So I have no idea where that happened, whether I gave that to a random student and never got it back or something, because in the last 5 years, that book has gone walkabout, and I'm like, That's really sad. So I have a new copy of Double Act because I have.
But if we could all go back to our like childhood selves and be very strict and say, hey, look, you're going to have an opportunity to give away your entire Jacqueline Wilson collection, and let me come to the future and say to you, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it, because you're going to spend hours in charity shops trying to claw them back.
Everyone needs to just hoard your
Yeah.
books.
It's just I have an issue with giving books away because I'm just like, but what if?
Yeah.
I just can't.
So obviously this summer we are on a bit of a Jacqueline Wilson resurgence. The new book was announced, I think, in the early spring, that Think Again would be coming in September. Think Again is Jacqueline Wilson's first adult book, which feels wild. And it will follow the characters Ellie, Magda, and Nadine from the Girls series, except now they are 40. So they have grown up, they have got lives, they have moved on from where we last met them. And it feels like this very particular era of millennial woman has essentially regressed entirely back to their childhood for the summer. We are going to car boot sales to try and claw back these copies. We are going to charity shops. We are scouring the internet. And the one thing that's been really important to me, and I feel like you guys will mirror it, is I don't want the new covers. I don't want new designs. I don't want any of that. So of course, when Think Again was announced, I was like, right, I'm gonna have to reread a load of Jacqueline Wilson, but obviously priorities are the Girls series. You'll notice that there's one missing here. It's because I can't find Girls in Love in this design.
I love those. That green and orange is so nostalgic to me.
Right.
The box that I got from W.H. Smith, it was that design. And I'm the same. I actually have I have two of them now, but I can't. Girls in Love is like in that design, nowhere to be found.
I think it's because it's the first one.
I've got my box set and the other one's a hardback, but I can't change this for a paperback. Very annoying. Like it hurts me, but also I can't find a paperback, so I've got to stick with this.
Alice, show me your version.
This was from the library. I got it yesterday.
No.
The new one. I know.
When did that come out?
I'm not sure.
I have that version from a charity shop.
So I've ordered a Girls in Love from World of Books, and the picture that was on the website is of this variant. But you know, when sometimes when you order a secondhand book from online and it will be the right book, but it might not be the right. I'm waiting with bated breath for it to arrive. I will film an unboxing and I will show you when it arrives, because I will be devastated. So I am yet to finish the reread for Girls series pre-Think Again, but I will, because I would like to have that experience of catching up with Ellie, Magda, and Nadine before I jump back into their 40-year-old lives. But I want to hear from you guys. How did you feel when you heard this announcement? Where were you? How did you see it announced? What was the gut feeling?
I feel like mine's really boring in that I was just working. So obviously I'm on Instagram. I see the post go up.
We're eternally online. That's how we found out.
Yeah, that's it. It's online. So I see the post go up and I'm like, it's like 3 minutes ago. And I'm like, okay, this is hot news. This is hot news. Shared it into multiple group chats. And I was like, exclamation mark. But yeah, that's it for me. I think my gut feeling is, I think it's that transition. Obviously, I'm not quite a 40-year-old woman, but when I first read the books, the box set, the first book starts when Ellie, Magda, and Nadine are 13. And when I read them, I was 11. And so I remember reading them, and like I think it was like a scene about like Ellie going home from school because she had really bad period cramps. And I was sat there thinking, oh my God, she's so grown up. She's got her period. So I think the transition from remembering how I felt reading that, thinking that they were older than me, and then to hear, okay, we're now going to get this book and they're adults and they're going to be in a similar life stage to me and doing similar things. It's just, I think it's like this deep-seated nostalgia, and also just this realization that I'm a grown-up. Like, we're all grown-ups now. And I think it'll be really interesting to read because, yeah, like 30-year-old me versus 11-year-old me is obviously a wild difference.
You know, I think I saw the visual first, and I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of like, it's not Nick Sharratt illustrations, but it is Nick Sharratt-esque. Like the Jacqueline Wilson font has a very particular font. And I remember definitely like doing a little bit of a double take, and then Elle, exactly like you said, dropping it into all of my relevant group chats. DM was just going, oh my God, what the hell?
Yeah.
That's how I found out about it, I think. I think you like sent it to me, Lex.
Yeah, I think Lex just made the group chat, like the work group chat, just pop off, and everyone was like, what?
Yeah, I think I heard from someone, probably Lex.
I mean, I'll take the credit. I don't mind. I think I'm excited to join these characters again. And I think the reread is going to be really important for me, because the things that I remember of these characters are definitely not the whole sum of their parts. Like I remember when one of them's been particularly badly behaved, or a particularly controversial moment in one of the books or whatever. That's what I remember. I feel like I want those characters to be fleshed out again for me. And does anybody remember the TV show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that was a wild ride for a little bit as well. And now I can't not picture the characters as they were in that TV show.
See, I don't. Like, I still see Ellie exactly how she's kind of described and like illustrated by Nick. Like, I feel like the casting of Ellie just was not right. Yeah, honestly, the fat phobia in that first book is unreal. But like, yeah, I still, when I think of Ellie, I think of like the big wild, like curly hair. I think of the glasses and the descriptions and the illustrations rather than the TV show. But maybe that's just like a classic book reader, isn't it? It's like oh, the TV show like hasn't got the characters right.
So
Yeah,
these are the characters as
UL.
per the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ellie and Magda and Nadine. And Nadine, I would say she looks like she does in the TV show. Magda obviously looks a little bit different in the TV show, and Ellie, I don't know what any of these actresses have done since. I don't recognize them from anything else other than this TV show, but I'm sure that they have done other stuff.
So I met, I can't remember what her name is. The main girl actress in the Girl series, because we auditioned for another program together. But
Olivia Hallinan, says the internet.
with ginger hair.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And she was lovely. So she did Sugar Rush after.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and that's what we both auditioned for. But she was really nice, but that is literally the only thing. But yeah, I haven't seen any of them in anything else. No. But that was a real, like, you know, when you get home from school and you're like, I have to watch this. I have to watch, like, Girls was that, like, for me, for sure. I had to watch it.
I was looking on the Wikipedia yesterday. Apparently it ran for 2 years. I don't remember 2 years worth of episodes and content, but I'm also now inclined to Google it and find them.
You can. I looked this morning again. I was like, I don't have memories of watching this show, so I went on the first episode, and obviously I've just reread the book, so it was like, yeah, interesting how accurate it felt to the book. Like I literally, like some of the scenes I'd literally just read. But yeah, I only really remember the Tracy Beaker show.
Yeah.
I feel like my sister was in the Tracy Beaker show, and I think I was at the age where I was like, I'm not interested in that anymore. I had got to the stage where I was obviously like a teen and very into like other things. But yeah, my sister was really into Tracy Beaker, and that is one of the Jacqueline Wilson books I've not actually read ever. Tracy Beaker. I know.
Jade, I think you and I are quite similar. Like I definitely aged out of the TV show, and it wasn't something that I watched. And I remember being quite sad about aging out of Jacqueline Wilson. Like you say, those first couple of years of secondary school, your reading kind of it becomes a lesser priority for you because you're out there kind of experiencing so many other new things. You know, you're experiencing the things that you've been reading about in these books. But I do remember I read Love Lessons, which came out in 2005, and then I read Midnight, which came out in 2006. And at that point, there was a part of me that was ready to let go of Jacqueline Wilson, but also sad about it too. Jenny, did you feel that? Were you sad to kind of age out at the time?
And I don't remember. I do remember watching Tracy Beaker, and I still think the casting for Tracy Beaker was impeccable.
Yeah.
Like, and I reread Tracy Beaker a couple months ago, and yeah, the casting is just how the characters are described. I do sort of, I don't remember ever going home and watching the girls' show. I remember it being a thing, but I don't remember being like, I must get home for whatever time and watch that. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think the girls trilogy and Dustbin Baby were probably like the last sort of books that I read as they came out. I think Dustbin Baby came out early 2000s, and I think that was then I was in secondary school and not reading anymore. So things like Love Lessons, Midnight, I never even knew that any of those existed because I was completely no longer interested or going to the library and reading those books. I don't remember feeling sad about it, but then again, that's a very long time ago. But yeah, I do now, like, I'm rereading back with them, and that nostalgia is just hitting so hard. And even the books that I hadn't read as like a young person, I'm still really enjoying. I'm kind of getting almost like secondhand nostalgia and being like, I wish I had read this as an early teen or as a tween, even though maybe they weren't even out then. But yeah, I don't remember kind of feeling like sad for aging out.
Just me? Was anybody else sad about aging out? Or was that just
feel
me?
like I didn't have as much like self-awareness, maybe. I just like one day didn't pick it up again, and then it was only looking back like, oh, that's the time that I sort of like when I'm looking down that list of books, like, oh, I don't remember this one or this one, and like just realizing, oh, that must have been when I was getting into like teen, right, like YA instead. And
Yeah.
I think I agree with Alice. I don't remember there being a point of me going, oh, Jacqueline Wilson's got a new book and I'm not interested. I think I just sort of, there is a distinct line, and it probably is at about Dustbin Baby, where I read that one, I haven't read anything after that, and just literally it was no longer on a radar at all.
Oh, sorry, Jacob, go on.
Does anyone know what, I might have missed something, like some information on the internet, but does anyone know what has driven Jacqueline Wilson to write this next book? Like, was it pressure from the community, like we need to know what they're up to, or was it her being like, one day I need to revisit these characters? Like, has that been released at all? Does anyone know that?
I would love to know the answer to that. I have read all of the press releases, I've watched the videos, I've watched the cover reveals, and I don't think that information has happened. I think it's a bloody brilliant marketing move. Like, the 11-year-olds that we were have all grown up into 30-year-old people who want to read. So it makes absolute total sense. Speaking of brilliant marketing moves, the pre-order campaign, if you pre-order and send them proof of purchase, you get entered into a raffle to have Nick Sharratt draw you. Like that, like, major props to the publishing team, because that is a killer competition.
Is that still open?
I'm like, apply now.
I mean, I think it probably is. I'll find you the link. But yeah, no, that's a great question, Jade. I would definitely love to know the answer to that.
Yeah, it
I know
really intrigues me.
She did say generally that, like, yeah, people over the years have like asked her how the characters were getting on and stuff, but yeah, obviously that would have been happening for years and years. So I don't know why specifically like 2024 she was like, okay, it's time.
Yeah, because it's been a really decent chunk of time.
Do you think she's been biding her time this whole time, waiting for us all to get to 30 to become like purchasing adults with some income?
Yeah, she's just looking at the state of the economy. She's like, let's pick our moment, and like
Yeah.
the age year on year.
Okay, so I would like to talk about some of the things that set Jacqueline Wilson apart from some other kind of middle grade YA writers. And for me, that was that she wasn't afraid to tackle the really hard things that happen in life in general, but also specifically to children. Quite a lot of the books that Jacqueline Wilson has written, or the ones that I have read at least, are about the most devastating things that could happen to a child. And I'm forever telling people that I think Jacqueline Wilson is the reason that I read crime thriller fiction today, because you read about what's the worst thing that can happen to a child, which is the gateway to something like Jodi Picoult, which is the worst thing that can happen to adults. And then, of course, the progression to crime thriller makes total sense. That being said, I know that there is conversation online about how, when rereading Jacqueline Wilson books, some of them don't land, some of them are harrowing in new ways that we didn't recognize when we first read them, when we were kind of 8, 9, 10, 11. The first Jacqueline Wilson book that I reread this year in my, Jacqueline Wilson Renaissance was Vicky Angel. And I wanted to make sure that that was the first one that I went back to reread, because it was the first one that I read the first time around, and it felt like a full circle that I was revisiting. And what I remembered from the book was that it was about Vicky Angel and her best friend, and it was about the dynamic between the two of them and this relationship. And that is definitely what this book is about. But also there are so many elements that I had just absolutely blocked out from my memory. I'd completely forgotten. There is so much commentary in Vicky Angel about how, quote unquote, skinny these characters are. And these characters are, I think they're kind of in year 7, year 8. And actually, upon reflection, that was what I was thinking about when I was in year 7, year 8. Like, oh, why does your school uniform look like that on you, but it looks like this on me? So even though I was rereading the book now at 31, and absolutely horrified at the kind of fat phobia in the book, when I read it the first time around, it didn't even, I didn't even bat an eyelid. I was just like, yeah, that's the way the world is, got it.
Do
But
you
then
think is that because you were reading it as an 11-year-old, or is that because you were reading it in the early 2000s when fat phobia was, when being skinny was the pinnacle of femininity and everybody had to be skinny?
It's so hard, isn't it? Because I think when I look back on Jacqueline Wilson as an author and as a person, I don't think she holds those beliefs. I don't think she is one of the authors that kind of puts her political kind of ideals into her characters. I think she was just very much writing in the time of the time, which is maybe why it's so jarring now that we're in 2024 and I'm looking back on this content going, oh shit, hang on a second. But Jenny, you've done so much rereading. What did anything really stick out for you that you want to revisit?
Yeah, so for me, there are a couple of things. So first of all, I thought what was really interesting is the books that I remember reading as more of a child were the books that were published in the 90s. So I'm aging myself here. So things like Tracy Beaker, Bad Girls, they're the ones that just got in front of me, even like, I guess, Suitcase Kid to an extent. But there was a lot of discussion in those early books around adoption and fostering. Dustman Baby is another one there where adoption seems to be like a big factor of a lot of her books. And then some of the books that I read that were slightly later that I hadn't read as a child seems to be more about divorce, single parents. So things like Lily Alone, Cookie, Diamond Girls, where we're focusing on a single parent family. And I was thinking, I don't know, I feel like the adoption side, I think, is really interesting because I don't feel like that's something that you see handled so sensitively in a lot of, kind of like middle grade YA books. A character may have no parents, but that isn't a factor. That's a device so that they can go on these amazing adventures. Whereas I think Jacqueline Wilson actually really, like, especially in, say, Tracy Beaker, she really, really tackles in what it is like to be, to be up for adoption or up for foster or living in a children's home. And that's something that really stuck out to me, how like those big themes changed. I do agree there is a lot that reading them now in 2024, I'm having to read with the mindset of this hasn't aged well. This wouldn't be written like this today, but in the early 90s, this is what happened. And so I'm reading with that understanding that, again, using Tracy Beaker as an example, it was written in like, I think 92, 93, something like that. There were just, you know, being skinny was the be all and end all. If you think sort of like the Kate Moss heroin thin was the fashion ideal. And you do see that in the books. And I'm sort of, as me reading it now, I'm kind of overlooking that because it was of the time rather than really impacting the characters. And again, I think that I really love how she handles these big, like you say, these big kind of dramatic themes that do impact a lot of children. And I think she does do it in a way that is sensitive on the whole. There are themes which I know we will get to, which I don't think have been handled as well, and I don't think we're handled.
I think we can talk about it now. So Jenny, I think you're talking about Love Lessons, correct? Yes. Okay, yeah. So Love Lessons came out in 2005, and for anybody who hasn't read it or isn't aware, it is about a young girl called Prue who is homeschooled by a very strict father. But fairly early on in the book, her father suffers a health incident and can't homeschool her anymore. So she has to go to a secondary school, I think, for the first time. And she forms an attachment with her kind of vibrant, charismatic arts teacher called Mr. Raxbury. And he is one of those teachers that we've kind of all known that he's a bit cooler. You can call him Rax if you want, like he's a little bit edgy, whatever. Prue starts babysitting for Rax. He starts dropping her home after, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this. They do eventually end up forming a relationship in which, of course, lots of irresponsible, and now looking back on it, illegal things happen. When Jenny reread this book, she made a TikTok about it, and it made me immediately want to reread it again, because I remember really enjoying Love Lessons when I read it in 2005, and I'll definitely want to reread it now. And there was an article, interestingly, in The Guardian about rewriting older books. It was around the controversy with Roald Dahl and what we should do with his books and whether they were appropriate for children now. And Jacqueline Wilson is included in that article, and she comments to say that she would not have written Love Lessons now. She wouldn't do it again, or she would handle it differently because she understands that it is different this time. But Jenny, you've read Love Lessons more recently than any of us. So how did that feel?
Honestly, it's one of the only books that I've ever read that I felt offended by. And because I just felt like I was reading this book, I knew where it was going to go. I knew we were going to have a student-teacher relationship. And I was like, okay, she's 14. I was hoping we were either going to see the teacher saying, absolutely no, shut it down, or we were going to see the repercussions that this teacher is the one who then kind of gets punished effectively. That didn't happen. And it was the 14-year-old girl who was the one who basically had to be asked to leave the school. So we didn't hurt his like work, and you know, we don't want him to
reputation.
That's the word I'm looking for. And even at the time, and again, I think what for me really struck is, again, in 2005, I was in year 11. So, and I remember in my school, there had been a controversy of a student-teacher relationship where the teacher had been fired. These things happened in the early 2000s. It wasn't a situation that was completely like unbelievable. These things did happen, and I just felt like it was handled poorly. And I think I do also want to say, I also in the same time I read Kiss for the first time, which I also felt hasn't aged well. That one is a kind of coming out story. It's about these two friends who, like a girl and a boy, who have been best friends forever until the boy, whose name I can't remember, makes a new male friend, and it turns out that actually he has feelings for this male friend. And I just felt like it was a coming out story that hadn't aged well, in that there was a lot of uses of the phrase, it's just a phase. Well, you're only 14, you can't actually know if you're gay, which I felt, again, today, not acceptable. In 2003, that probably was what people were saying. So I was sort of trying to be generous there, but again, I did feel like those early ones really not handled well. However, I do want to say, at the same time, last month, I also read Baby Love. This is a newer one. This came out, I think, in about 2022. And this one is about a 14-year-old girl who gets pregnant, set in the 1960s. She falls pregnant and she is sent away to a mother and baby home to have a child, and it's then about that child being put up for adoption. But what I thought was fantastic is at the end of this, there is 2 notes. So there is a note on adoption and about what would happen, about how actually this did happen in the 60s, but doesn't happen today, and how people can find their parents from if they were adopted then, and a note on sexual consent, and about how even though the word rape or sexual assault was not mentioned in this book, that is what we would call it today. And I just thought that is exactly what is needed in these books, which deal with these really heavy topics, where we're not taking it out of the historical context, but we are acknowledging that there is an issue.
No, I think it's very effective handling from both Jacqueline Wilson and publishers. You know, she still gets to write about the hard topics that everybody experiences or has awareness of, but just doing it in a more 2024 appropriate way. You mentioned The Suitcase Kid. That book changed my life. My parents were divorcing at the same time as I read it. So to be able to completely relate to that character dramatically changed the emotional intelligence that I had. And I do credit Jacqueline Wilson for me being a fairly emotionally intelligent child. Elle, Jade, or Alice, how did you kind of find reading those harder topics at a young age? Or have you reread any now that have landed differently for you?
I haven't done any rereading yet, but I'm planning to. That's why I'm collecting them. I think, yeah, sorry, just thinking a lot about what Jenny said. So, like, for context, getting a bit deeper here, when I was reading these books, I did have quite a traumatic childhood. So I was living in a situation that was single parent, was full of addiction, it was turbulent, and I think the reason I probably latched myself so easily onto Jacqueline Wilson books was just because I was finally reading stories that were, I don't know, even if it wasn't the same sort of trauma, the same sort of situation, I could heavily relate to. And it was like I was finally reading about these children or young teenagers who were going through life experiences that were really similar to mine. And so I think this is why it might be hard to reread in 2024, because obviously I'm not looking at it from the lens of a child anymore. I'm looking at it from the lens of someone who has spent a very long time in therapy and is emotionally intelligent and can reflect on what those traumas were. But I think it's almost why I feel it is important to kind of preserve the books as they are, because even if we if we take the example of maybe that somebody's coming out wasn't handled very well and there's lots of questioning about it's just a phase, realistically people live that. Even if it feels abhorrent to us now, people live that and people still live that. And I think there's a fine line, isn't there, between whether it was or wasn't handled well, because we're still reading stories about these things. Like, think about the popularity of My Dark Vanessa, about a student-teacher relationship. We all know now from the lens of an adult it was wrong, and I haven't reread it, so I don't know how it's portrayed in there. But I think it's just, yeah, from the lens of a child who was living in a household that could have been a Jacqueline Wilson book, it was refreshing to read something that wasn't your typical middle class white child experience. And like, even to this day, and don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean they don't exist, but I was 30 before I read a middle grade novel that tackled parental addiction. And I just think she was probably one of the few authors at that time period who really was putting out those stories that kids in not so happy homes needed to read. Yeah.
100% agree.
Jade or
I think
Alice, did you?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
sorry.
have no like link or recollection of like, you know, any sort of attachment like that. I remember reading about divorce in Jacqueline Wilson when I was younger and being like, this is really like upsetting. This is really sad for people that go through that. And I remember that like leading into a conversation with my parents about what it is and, you know, all of that. But more recently, I've mentioned The Cat Mummy. I didn't read this as a younger person, but I read this recently. Sorry if you can hear loud music outside. And this, like, I'm an emotional person anyway. I'm very emotional and I'm not afraid to admit that. But this actually brought tears to my eyes when I was reading it in several places. It's like a pet that dies, there's a parent death in there, and I totally agree that things like this it's really important for children to read, because otherwise you're like, you just go through that kind of period of your time reading about fluffy stories and things that aren't actually real life, when actually horrible things do happen in real life, and being able to read about them and have a really good approach to them is just it's so massive for young readers, isn't it, to be exposed to that. But yeah, I wish that I'd read that as a younger person, because I went through, like a lot of us, when we had pets as a child, and you go through the loss of a pet, and you know, obviously some people go through losses of parents and family members and things, and without having something like that, you know, what do you have to like talk about when things like that happen? But yeah, I think it's so important, and Jacqueline Wilson was, you know, that person for us all, wasn't she?
Mm.
But yeah, The Cat Mummy is a ride if you if you want to pick that up.
Stairs. I think I might actually read it this evening.
You've got
Yeah, no,
to
I agree with like, well, like Lex, like it is, even if it's not exactly what you were going through, it's like it is just that representation of like factors. Like, because I remember the one that I have like the strongest connection to was Best Friends, because again, it was kind of like mirroring you said about the suitcase kid, like you could see. Because like around the time I was reading it, like, and the character's called Alice, and like she moves up to Scotland, and I was moving up to Cumbria, which is like basically, and yeah, and it was about like the best friends, whether they would remain best friends, and like we kind of looked similar, like in the illustration. So I was like, oh my God, it's me. And so I do think it's just like kids, you can just like latch on so much to, and that's why I'm not sure whether like I want to reread it or not, because I'm like, if I reread it and then like I think as a child you do latch onto the things that like you relate to, and then if I like, I don't know, don't no longer relate to it, then it's kind of like overlaying my childhood nostalgia, so it's a tricky one, I think.
That separation of friendships as well, like if you move or if you go to a different school or your friend goes to a different school, that at the time is like the biggest thing to happen
Yeah.
to you, isn't it? Like that's major. So for you to see yourself in that book, like in that situation, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? To be able to read and be like, I'm not the only person that's having to like go through this situation and being separated from my best friend, who means the world to me.
Yeah, and I do think it's that when you're reading like any children's books, but especially like rereading, at the time, like those are the most important things to you. Like reading Girls in Love yesterday, like all of those things where they were like, she was like, oh my God, I need a boyfriend. And like you can see like the friends like sort of not talking to each other because they're like thinking about boys. And it's like that period when you're like 13 where you are sort of doing that. And now you kind of have different like priorities potentially. So it is interesting to like go back into the mind of when you were younger.
Perfect. I'm so aware that we're running out of time, but so glad that we can all kind of collectively revel in the validation and the accessibility to certain conversations that Jacqueline Wilson books afforded us during our childhood and again now, which I think is so important. But before I let you go, I just want to talk very briefly about Think Again. So Think Again is the brand new Jacqueline Wilson book coming out on September 12th. I do have it on pre-order. So girls, I guess the question is, are we reading it together as soon as it lands?
You have to release it.
100%. 100%.
I need to pre-order it today, actually. I still haven't pre-ordered it. I need to.
I'll find the Nick Sharratt link for you.
Yes.
And also, I know I shared this, I think I shared this with all of you in various DM groups. It's just been announced that Carrie Hope Fletcher will be voicing the audiobook.
Yeah.
Which I'm very excited about. Again, I think Alice, you said it in a DM to me, it feels like full circle culmination of millennial me and tween age me.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, in that case, if nobody has any other comments that we would like to make about Jacqueline Wilson, we will leave it at that. So, team, if you are watching this video, thank you so much for bearing with us through all of our nostalgic musings. If you are rereading any Jacqueline Wilson books ahead of Think Again, let us know what you're reading and what you're thinking of them. Let us know if you're going to be pre-ordering Think Again or if you're going to be reading it when it comes out, and maybe we can do a little bit of an unofficial read-along buddy read of Think Again in our DM groups.